Jealous. Looking forward to having all of my coffee.
Well,
All right, so we
you can be jealous. I'm just nervous. I'm just
Jittery.
jittery.
So we jump into this like people jump into fields when they're making crop circles with
Like they
boards
pole
and
vault, like they pole vault into fields in their 60s. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. But let's land presumably better than they did.
Obviously, because we are much younger and much more nimble than those in their 60s.
Much more nimble.
Crop circles are very interesting. They allegedly go back to the 9th century. There was like the Bishop of France. Apparently there was some kind of reference to it there. You had 1686. Robert Plot was a professor at Oxford, talked about crop circles. I believe he referred to it as the mowing devil, as these things showed up in the fields. You had John Leyland back during Henry VIII times. I mean, these go back pretty far. And if you listen to modern explanations, they're all over the map. You know, they have people using boards, you have ball lightning, you have wind, weather phenomenon, all kinds of things. They're weird. Sometimes you hear that these stalks will continue to grow sideways once they're flattened. Sometimes when wheat grows, as it gets ready to harvest, I guess the top kind of like arcs over, and that's very natural. And you go to unbend it, and it kind of goes whoop, like flips back over. But allegedly in fields where supposedly the crop circle has a non-human origin, they actually straighten out. And you go to bend them, and they go whoop. They just point back up again. So very weird. In my research, they say that all of them can be explained by natural phenomenon, but I don't know. It's very interesting.
It is, and it's I mean, like that. It's all over the place. Because like if you would have asked me 6 weeks ago, you know, my thoughts on crop circles right off the bat, I would have been like, well, they're weird and interesting. I think a lot of them have been confirmed hoaxes, and I specifically would have been like, yeah, there's something where people get like rope and a board and they kind of walk along and do it. But that, I think, just goes to show you how well that storyline has sort of coded things, because we should get into that later, talking about like the wheat and the like the various things that happen that are like really hard / impossible to fake, because that like kind of blew my mind. Popcorn, you know, we'll get to that. We'll come back to that.
I definitely believe like in the, not like the hoax phenomena, but there are a lot of people who do go out and make crop circles. Like there's people who are like, that kind of is like an art thing, a professional thing, but that doesn't like, but the full like hoax theory that all of them are hoaxes, even the ones that like exhibit, say like they're in more remote locations, or they're in, you know, like they have that, like they look like they've been burnt, or, you know, they have some kind of like radiation, like there's like some kind of microwave thing. And it's like, you can't factor that into the hoax like phenomenon easily, especially when you are dealing with like the, you know, the two guys from England that are like, we made most of the crop circles, and like we did, you know, like in the 80s and 90s or whatever, and then they came forward. It's like
wait. Let's give credit where credit's due. Dave Shirley and Doug Bauer.
Okay, yeah. So it's
I believe are the names.
I was going to call them Doug and Dave.
There's difference between like the ones that like occur that way, and it's like, you know, where it's like, okay, you can do this way, like, and people have gotten really good at it and like more professional over the years, and like, you know, about doing certain things, like, but it's like that. But at the time, if you wanted to also add in the like difficulty of adding in the like the crop circles that are more like burnt down, exhibit like the radio, like the, you know, kind of microwave thing, to make like I was like trying to like theory this out with like, if you wanted to make a portable microwave rig, right? Because there's this like ideas like, well, they could have just had a backpack with some kind of portable microwave rig, but in like the even like given the technology of like the 80s, like first of all, like the kind of like energy you'd have to have with it, like batteries are not as sophisticated then. Like you're looking at, you know, your, you know, car batteries, like these kind of things, or you'd have to have a generator, you know, like, and that's not to explain that most of the microwave like sort of like military tech at the time was on like trucks and stuff. This is not like portable things, and it'd be like really dangerous. Like, it's like and then to drag that stuff out into a field, you're gonna leave trails, and if you're trying to do it covertly at night, you're gonna be like,
and why? So that some specialist researcher can discover something that would have implied radiation. Like, why would you?
Yeah, it's like really like giving this other level to it that like, and no one's confirmed the existence of these things. Even the people who've claimed that they were like behind these, different stuff. So it's like, so there is like this kind of variant, like.
I mean, we're 40
prank.
years later, and these things haven't shown up in military technology or things to get rid of bugs in your yard or something. I mean,
or just like something you can pick up at Home
public.
Depot. My microwave burned crop circle gun.
So like if these things were around, apparently they are only useful for faking crop circles.
Yeah, it's like,
and like the underpants gnomes, it's like, where does this pay off?
There's certain areas where these tend to show up more, right? Like crop circles tend to be in like particular areas. We can talk a little bit about like the ball lightning plasma theory, and it's like, and that kind of makes sense. Like the ones in like say Brazil, it has all the environmental conditions for something like creating like ball lightning stuff. Like it's just like and it's like there's different areas where that is. But if you think about it, like these did show up in England a lot, probably. And then if you were people that were exposed to these, then you might want to go and start faking some of them too. I mean, like it's almost like the kind of like art imitates natural phenomenon, like something that you would have to have been exposed to know that they exist in order to like, I don't think it's like to fake it, it's like, and it seems like there's different regions where these things happen more often than other places. Like, it's not like it's, so just kind of.
And so like the thing with me is like, okay, you got a couple factors here, which are like problematic riddles. If it's going to be like, okay, well, these were just people with lots of time. First one is that actually when Doug and Dave, the aforementioned bored string guys in England, so bored that they got a board and a string and made crop circles, they weren't very good at it when they actually demonstrated it. Their crop circles were always out of alignment. They're going, even when they're going according to plan, the one dude like makes like a circle twice as big as it's supposed to be and then just kind of bounces. Like the things are damaged. They're clearly damaged on one side of the plant where a board would be pressing them down, And so it's like they're janky and just wonky kind of creations. And then there are these things. We mentioned the pole vaulting. They claim to have done this one, the Cheesefoot Head crop circle, which was a 1983 phenomenon. And they've got this diagram that shows, oh yeah, we did it. But in the diagram, it shows these foot trails that go to it. Well, and that wasn't how it was in the real world. And so like, they're like, well, how'd you do that? And they said, oh, we pole vaulted in and presumably out of this field and did this thing. And although we can't do them in alignment during the day with no need to remain secret, at night we do them in perfect alignment. And there are these elaborate things. It doesn't add up. And it just screams of like, these dudes were paid.
Or they just wanted the attention. Like they were just like, oh, we like,
But apparently they were paid for their story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were paid half from what I recall from my research, like half up front, and they never got the second half, and they ended up suing whoever to get the rest of their money.
Yeah, you think like you would have like also sort of arrest these guys for like destruction of property or fine them or something, considering
if they weren't being paid by the government to the.
You see, like they were admitting to. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There are things now where people do make crop circles for commercial endeavors. They'll survey the areas. They'll lay the thing. They'll have designs and they'll make them. So they can, for whatever that is, like an advertisement type of deal. Something like the album covers, you know, notably like the Led Zeppelin album covers or whatever. Like people will make crop circles and photograph them and do a thing, you know. But it's like it's like, but they're not doing that under cover of night. They don't have to sneak in to fields. They're not.
They don't have to like. People aren't going to come and look at the plants and be like, nah.
It's made for like a thing, you know. It's just like, you know, so it's because it's like also it could be like a tourist thing. It's like, you know, it's good stuff, you know. I mean, like it attracts people to, at least back in maybe, I don't know how much recently people care about crop circles too much anymore, but you know, it's like I know they still happen, but it's not. I feel like it's like we tidy that up. The board string guys solved the problem, therefore, you know.
They like solved the problem of the social discourse around this stuff, and that's kind of the thing. All right, so I'm going to go, as I do, I'm going to go off course a little bit, and I'm going to talk about.
Are you going to pole vault elsewhere? Is that what you're
I'm
doing?
going to pole vault elsewhere, and I'm going to land
into your field, and you know.
I'm going to land in Area 51, because how else do you get in there? Pole vaulting. Because all these unidentified things are flying in, you just have to look weird when you're coming in, like you might be a spaceship. Pole vault and just kind of, you know, take a weird shape. And so there's this idea that, okay, so Area 51. Well, we're not going to get too into this. One version is like, there are alien things going on there. Real extraterrestrial space alien stuff. And we have maybe their bodies, we have their technology, we're building their technology or whatever. Another thing is, no, it's just experimental aircraft, and there's a story about aliens that surrounds it because that's a convenient way to cover up experimental aircraft. Because, like, yeah, no one would be interested in aliens. And then you've got this idea that it's experimental aircraft, and the people that are working on it are told it's actually alien stuff. So that when they go out there and try and say, hey, we're working on this high-tech stuff, it's from the aliens, it's like they're automatically discredited. So anything they say is like, well, I don't want to listen to this guy about, you know, these anti-gravity spin devices that they're working on because he's talking about aliens. Like, he's obviously an idiot, right? So there's this idea that, yeah, a lot of this stuff gets kind of baked together, so it automatically discredits the people revealing these government secrets. Okay, so, and there are all kinds of mutations around that. We don't have to get into all that. But if we go back now to the crop circles, I made it back. Guys, I made it back with my pole vault. I can do it.
Your circle's wonky, yo. I think you need to
everything about me is wonky.
You got to get this, like, you got to get their fractals down a little better.
That's how you know it's me. It's my fingerprint. So now here we are at the crop circle thing, and it's like, well, okay. If there's a real, I'll just say, real unexplained phenomenon, or phenomenon still under investigation by the government, let's just say by the government, what would be the benefit of throwing people off the trail? And like, well, there would be some presumed benefit to getting to the bottom of the story without other people knowing what's going on, or without other people interfacing with this in a way that makes the investigation harder. Like, so if we just take it to something like Bigfoot, because why not? And let's just say, well, the government wants to throw us off from the truth of Bigfoot because they're so close to Bigfoot, and then here come these campers coming through, you know, looking for Bigfoot, and then they scare them off, and they got to start over again. All right, and you can create like a sophisticated argument around that with crop circles for why the government might not want other researchers mucking up the research. But then the other thing is like, well, if nobody believes in this stuff, then they'll abandon ship, and then the government can get to the bottom of it and use whatever they discover for their nefarious government purposes, which I think is like the leading edge, like when it comes to like, why do governments cover stuff up? It's like, well
but maybe like, can we go just a different, like maybe just a whole slightly less, like, you know, the government has some level of competency, you know. and reason for doing things.
Right.
And maybe like here's like an alternate version of this where it would be like these things are freaking weird. Maybe they're caused by natural phenomena we don't understand, but it's just something or whatever, but it is something really weird. And it's something that's kind of upsetting just to the public, like in the areas where these things occur.
Right.
So if it's just all pranks, then that's it. Now it's like, so you just kind of like, so even if it's like not something they care about researching, but it's just one of these weird things that happen that make the world kind of unexplainable and strange, right? Like however you want to like figure that
Right.
out. If it's just caused by pranksters, then, and it's always been like, you know, whether it's someone going out and like mowing down someone's field at night in the, you know, 12th century or whatever. It's, you know, it's like, or it's teenagers with boards and things hanging out by Stonehenge making crop circles. It kind of gives it, like, we don't have to think about it anymore, right? It's like, you don't, the weird, it's not really weird. There's nothing weird going on. So don't worry about it. Whether they're actually like looking into it or care about looking into it, it's just like, it's one of the, maybe it's like one of those things that feels like it kind of breaks the, you know, the barrier a little bit. And when you break the barrier and make things weird, people kind of get freaked out. But if it's easily explainable, then it doesn't matter, you know? Even aliens would be like, okay, well, there's probably aliens. I guess they would do something stupid like this. Yeah, it's like make a bunch of patterns because they have to, you know, because they're aliens and they're weird, and that's like how they communicate by burning people's fields up or whatever it is. Like it's like, but I kind of feel like the like it could be just as like that level of like pranksters is easy to explain something that we don't really understand and kind of messes with our understanding of things.
And sort of the benefit of that would be what, like control?
Yeah, like keeping
keeping
yeah,
people
keeping people
from getting weird.
Yeah, from being like, yeah, kind of like why you would, you know, ban like certain types of like substances, like, oh, it makes society, you know, it's harmful to the structure of society that just keeps everybody, you know, going about their day, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like, you know, kind of like if there was a meteor and it was going to collide with the Earth, like, and people knew about it, I'm sure they'd, even if you couldn't do something and say we couldn't do anything about it, they probably wouldn't tell us because they want to keep things rolling, you know? It's like until like the last minute when everything blows, you know, it's like it's just kind of like, I think a lot of it might just be like, they can't explain it. It is something weird. Here's if it is like, if it was like the government, but it could just be like, or it could just be like, well, it's just easy to accept those kinds of, you know, explanations. Like it is.
I think
it's like,
yeah, the government really relies, and all government relies on an official story. And I think when you break that, it's not very useful. And like, so like right now, if I put a curse on somebody, for the time being in the United States, you can't take me to court for that.
Well, but we can't remember we established that at least fortune telling is illegal in New York City.
But putting curses on people for my own pleasure or I don't know, sense of justice or emotional regulation, that is still legal as of early April 2026. So, why? Well, if they started having, I mean, first of all, one explanation is because it's fake. It's not real, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But if it does do something, and that, let's say the official powers know that it does something, okay? That'd be a pain in the butt to have to prosecute because you can't, what do you use as evidence? Like, we got a lot of people. Like, there's already, the dockets are already full of DUI cases. If you had to do everything for everybody that thought they were getting the evil eye, you know, like, you'd never be able to do these things.
That's why witch trials are better in small villages, you know? I mean, like,
yeah, well, you know, so that's the thing, right? So
she turned me into
I think it's really inconvenient to have to prosecute witchcraft cases on that level.
Yeah.
And so, like, all right, and then, like, if the official story kind of like, okay, we need to, like, cut off all these things at the edges, get rid of our big feet and chupacabras, our Bloody Marys and crop circles, and just keep things within we're here to buy and sell things.
Yeah.
And that's how you feel better and fix your life, is buying something or selling it. then it's a lot easier to manage all this. Or is it that nobody believes this stuff? You know,
Well, I think that's probably true too. I think, like, I think most people. I mean, like, I think there's like probably like a sinking suspicion. Like, I think, science, like, it's like there's more that we don't know than we do know, and that's always going to be the case. Like, the universe is like basically infinite, right? It's like there's like, and there is weird things, and you might be able to eventually like explain something, like, it's like, okay, like, crop circles, like the real ones, like, I'll say real, for lack of a better term, that aren't the hoax ones, or like that have the weird phenomenon. They are. It's like plasma, crazy plasma storms. I mean, plasma is the most common form of matter in the universe. Like, that's how, more so than other things, and it's like, why it's doing that. Well, maybe it's the certain places have these environmental conditions to do that. Why do they look geometric? Well, we know fractal patterns and these things appear in nature. Okay, fine. Like, you can kind of get around that a little bit, but like, it's still freaking weird, even if that is.
Yeah, because that doesn't even cover it though, right? Because like,
that's still like a weird. Because I mean, like that, like for listeners, I shared a video the other day with the guys of like ball lightning that was happening in Canada, and that. That's just weird. I mean, like, it's one of these things where it's like very few people see it. It happens, but it's like the phenomenon is really strange. They were saying possibly some of the Brazilian crop circles because of the way they move like that. But if it was ball lightning kind of moving, it would give it that. And like, we know like certain patterns do appear in nature. It's like that is kind of weird. But still, that is a strange phenomenon. To happen, and it is a weird, like, just generally a weird thing. It's like, I mean, like, even that, like, as a thing, if I was out in like a field and a ball of lightning appeared, I'd be like, "Jeez, what the hell is that?" I probably would be freaked out, and that is something that we kind of know happens, and people have seen it, at least in like certain. Like, that is scary. It's a scary thing,
and but it tends not to leave messages in binary code. Like,
right.
That's the weird part, because like how. So it's like there are these things out there that are like official explanations, but it doesn't cover a lot of this stuff. And also, like, some of this stuff you don't actually, like, no one knows what it is, right? And then somebody's like a mathematician's looking at it, and they're like, it's pi. Look, and like they're like, oh, no, here are these things. And then you can actually see, oh, yeah, this is pi to 10 decimal places. Like, and there's even an indication that it's an endless number. Like, in the thing, that was actually a thing. That was, I don't think I have the actual name of that one.
Was that done by like the board guys?
No, it's way too complicated. And like a lot of these things are like there's so in 1996 you've got the Stonehenge surprise, which was a fractal. They called it a Julia set. It's a fractal pattern, and it's like. But here's the thing: guys that come up with pranks to do with boards and string in pubs don't know about the effing Julia set, let alone be able to represent it across some big field. Like, the kinds of people...
They could have been Oxford pranksters, like
All right, look. It could be the guitarist, or the guys from Queen, right? Like, because one of them's an astrophysicist. They're in the UK and stuff. It could have been those guys. But what we have to do is actually compare when these things showed up versus the Queen tour dates. And they weren't around in the 9th century.
So if I'm hearing you right, we solved who the real hoaxers are. It was Queen.
Oh, and Freddie Mercury. The Bell UFO was supposed to be spinning Mercury. To cause it to float, right? Yeah. Spinning Freddie Mercury, huh? Could anyone say,
The Stonehenge one is kind of like...
Give me the power? Give me the prize?
Well, but one second. I just got to tie this up real quick before we do that. So we actually love Queen, so no disrespect
we do,
at all.
We're
great musicians, great band. So I'm sorry, I had to say it. Go ahead.
But yeah, the one thing that's interesting about that is like I think it was like, if I'm thinking about the same one, the speed at which that happened, like there was like two explanations. One was there was a guy who did a flyover, it wasn't there, and they was coming back, and like whatever, an hour later it was there. That was that, and they said, well, maybe it was done overnight, but it still would have had to been done in a couple of hours. And most people said it was like, even like they said like even with a large team, and all working in precision, and because of like the weather, I think at that time it was like raining and stuff. It would have to have happened like so like they would have only had a couple hours, and everyone would have had to be working in like perfect coordination to get the exact. Is that the same one, right? The Julia.
That's either that one or it's the
Might be the Milk spiral.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe that's the one I was
So
thinking.
let's hang on that for a second. Okay, that
all right.
comprised of like 409 circles, and they were all crazy sizes. I think the smallest were between 3 and 10 feet. So I guess, I don't know, 1 and 3 meters approximately. And the largest was like maybe 50 feet in diameter. So whatever that is.
And they were like perfect.
Yeah. 409.
And there was no incident, like they couldn't tell that there was like a way to get in and out of the field either, right? Like it was like in that one too.
Yeah. And yeah, it was like 4 hours on a rainy night or something like that.
Yeah.
It showed
No,
up.
no. What I will say about this one, Bill, kind of what you were saying, actually, there are, I forget what they're called, but like the lines where the tractors go,
Right.
those did exist in the field. So it is possible they could have used, if it was a hoax, could have used that to kind of get through it and create it. But still, it was only a few hours. I think it was like 4 hours of darkness. It rained that night. So there was no evidence of like muddy footprints, anything like that. Yeah. And kind of like what you're saying, just having the precision to be able to do all those perfectly in a short amount of time. And if you're just a couple of people, being able to do that so fast, and if you have a bunch of people, all of them having decent skill level to do this, because as far as I know, people aren't practicing this anywhere, or maybe they are. Maybe they're like starting with like smaller ones.
Yeah, you have like a team of like 25 people and like laser survey guys up in like the hills going like, okay guys, little to the left, keep going, and, like and you all have to do
in
that.
the dark.
Yeah, in the dark, in the rain.
2001.
Yeah, in the rain. Yeah. It's like it's that does feel a little like. It does
Like
seem
cell
like
phones existed in 2001, but like.
Yeah, I mean, you could use walkie-talkies, I guess, like that kind of thing of that, but it's still like, it does feel like, to do like that idea of like getting it done that fast, even with from like what I've read from like the skeptic, perspective, they still felt like that was like, would have been very complicated to pull off. Like, there would have had to be, and then nobody, so say you have this big coordinated team of people who are doing this, that one person like breaks. I mean, like, because the bigger a conspiracy gets, the more likely like somebody's going to break. So it's like, there's got to be like, so they're all like, just like laughing still, like years, like nobody in like the 20 something years of that one happening be like, yeah, it was us. We were this like awesome team of specialty like crop circle guys. We were just so into it. There was like 20 of us, and we were so good. We could do these things so fast, and it was just like I don't know. Yeah. Also, building the skills to do it that quickly, like again, like you said, like you have to practice and make sure you.
Otherwise, what you have to do is be like, actually, the witness lied altogether. They worked on this for weeks,
right?
And then they just said it showed up.
Right.
So it's like the he's lying kind of thing. And it's like, but then there are things that are harder to say about that. So,
well, like you said, the Julia one, I think that was the one that showed up really fast. It's like whether it showed up overnight
and Stonehenge is like always under surveillance.
Yeah.
Like it's always being, so it's like, how the hell would they not, like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like.
So it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. And like talking about the idea of like these things that are like specialists would realize these things, but like they're not the same kind of people that are like prone to doing like large scale pranks, So you guys know about so like in the 70s there was this thing that was beamed into space on a radio telescope that was like, I forget what it was called, but it was basically like a binary code message, that showed some basic stuff about Earth. This isn't the thing that was on Voyager. That was like the engraving of people.
Oh, you mean
It
the
was
records?
the Arecibo Message.
Okay, yeah.
And it came from the Arecibo radio telescope, I believe.
Okay, and so this thing, that makes sense, because this thing was called the Arecibo Answer.
Yep.
And it came back in 2001. And it's like a response to the Arecibo Message or broadcast or whatever. That's like, like slam books. Do you remember those in grade school or whatever? People would like write like, what's your favorite color? And like you're like number 1 through 12, and you just fill out the answer on number 12 for everyone in there, right? And it's like, so that's kind of like, oh well, what are you made of? We're made of carbon, and these are like, oh well, we're made of silicone, or and like it's kind of like a point by point, like, hey, this is where you live. This is the kind of place we live. And so there's this thing, though, at the bottom of it, there's this thing that looks, so at the bottom of the original one that we sent out, we do like this sort of like an ASCII drawing of or not an ASCII, like a binary, so a drawing of a radio telescope. And so on this other thing, there seems to be this machine that's indicated that might be how they broadcast this back or got this message or whatever. And so, and that thing, that image at the bottom seems to have appeared in like another crop circle from like years before or years later, or.
I do think that there are ones that are like prankster kind of things, but I always find it weird that, like, especially for like the really cool ass ones, like that just nobody aside from these two guys takes any credit for any of them ever. Like it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of people, like, other than obviously people that do this for commercial things, like that people know that they're doing them because they're getting hired to make something, just like you hire a contractor, hire whatever, it's like that kind of thing. But like it's just like weird, like I don't know, it just feels like somebody somewhere would be like, yeah, I did this, like I'm awesome, I make these freaking cool ass crop circles, and it's like, and I figured out like this, like I don't know, just like that's much more I put these board and string guys to the thing. Look, I did, I mean, I know people have like done demonstrations of like, oh well, people could do it this way, but they're not the ones who have done it. They're not taking responsibility. They're just trying to give explanations and go on the thing. Like, so it's like, I don't know. I think like one of these, somebody would come up and, say something like something, be like, oh,
yeah, because like why do it? Why do it? Like, what's the payoff? And that's kind of.
Like you're just bored. I don't know. It says like it's art, I guess, in a weird way. I don't know. It's like, I mean, like I guess it's.
But and that's okay. So that's just for the prank ones.
Right. I'm just that's
and let's
specifically.
And let's say.
But even if you just said all of them
because
are pranks,
maybe in their locality, they kind of say they're about it, but it just never gets big because.
Right.
Also, a lot of these things just aren't talked about anymore because of the debunking. By Doug and Dave, the so-called debunking. So it's like I said in the beginning of this conversation today, I was like, a few weeks ago, I would have been like, yeah, no, I don't think any of those things are like unexplained or anything. I think they're, I mean, but that just shows how well that story has kind of like distributed, because like that. Okay, so Doug and Dave, okay, that was in 1991.
Yeah, but they said they were doing them since what, the 70s or something like that. Was that it, or like?
Right.
They were the ones that kicked off the phenomenon of all the other pranksters that are doing it as well. Like like all around the, and I guess it's been a common prank since whatever, like at least the Middle Ages. But it's like this is just a prank people always do in this part of England. It's just like they're.
So the Julia set though.
Yeah.
96.
Yeah.
Okay.
So were they out? That was like a copycat of Doug.
That was the Stonehenge surprise.
Right.
They had to be really good. They got like really good with that technique revealed in 91.
Right.
Like in 5 years, they got so good that they could do it with government stuff watching Stonehenge and do it overnight, and it's a
A
Julius
tourist
Yeah.
attraction, you know.
So,
that's
so
pretty
all right. So hang on this for a second. Okay, so they've been doing those two guys, Doug and whoever, Doug and Dave, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so they were doing this since the 70s. You said, right?
That's their claim.
Okay,
Yes, yeah.
and in '91.
Although they're inconsistent about when they started.
That's okay. That's okay. We're gonna roll with this for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So in '91, they went public and said that they were the ones creating these.
Right.
Okay. And in '91, so they were doing this for 15, 20 years ballpark. Okay. 15, 20 years doing this, and they were still producing shoddy circles.
Right?
After all that experience, all that time.
They were straight up paid off. I'll
Yeah,
say it.
yeah.
I'll say it.
by the real crop circle manufacturer, Banksy. Banksy has been
They're
doing
still
this.
trying to figure out how to profit off of it. but-
Doing it all along. It's been one of these days, you know.
But these things
yeah.
keep getting more sort of elaborate. And so it's like by the time, so in 2003, you've got a crop circle that's made with just the wheat curled a few inches from the top. So it's not even, how the hell do you do that? And that kind of gets into that whole world of what we were talking about with the radiation thing.
Did you guys come across the so I think it's in Chile where it's like the similar to where like the Nazca lines are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there were like basically sand crop circles that I think I want to say it was like circa 2005, 2006 or something like that. Now those would be like really hard to produce because it's like you're digging and you know you have to have more like excavation type of tools, but it was still like crop circles, but they were sand circles. The one explanation is they were covered up original Nazca lines that like eventually like were uncovered by a storm or something, so they could have already been there. But if it was the other thing and it was the pranksters, they were like it would require a significant amount of equipment and time, and in an area that you're not really supposed to be doing something. Because I think around a lot of those lines they're like considered cultural heritage sites and things like that, you know, so it's like I don't think you're allowed to just be like, let me just bring a bunch of excavation equipment and start digging these circles for a prank, you know. So it's you know, like kind of again these weird kind of things, but I thought that was like kind of interesting in a, you know, it's like similar phenomenon but like much harder to produce than flattening wheat down, you know, in fields.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of this stuff. There's some other things that are kind of these weird outliers. There's a guy called Robert Ridge who is deer hunting in Roswell, New Mexico, and discovers a stone with these etchings on it. And he just kind of thinks it's this cool thing. And turns out the etchings that are on it match a crop circle that had appeared like a few years before. Yeah, from 8 years before. And when they actually look at the stone, there are no like carving marks on it. Like everything's very smooth and everything.
It was also magnetic in nature in some way.
Yeah. It was like lodestone or something like that, which was like a non-local, like it wasn't a
like
locally
so
occurring.
you say it's like a meteorite or something like that, like with an etching on it. That's a weird thing to, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and it's in Roswell. Just saying, you know, it's okay, you know. So that's like a weird. So these weird kind of correlations that are like, well, so somebody did this crop circle, this elaborate crop circle, then takes a stone carving of it in lodestone, goes to Roswell and throws it there on, I don't know, in some deer hunting area. So someone will find it later and it'll all come together.
Or does someone approach the guy and it's like, here's a stone, we want you to say this, here's some money.
Yes.
Does the deer hunting guy have any stone carving was he interested in aliens or crop circles or whatever stuff? Like, I guess if you're living out there, you might just be in the culture. Well, what about the weird stuff with like let's jump away a little bit from the like modern versions and the conspiracy theories. Like jump back to like the weird like medieval versions of these things that are like they're like some kind of demons, or they're they're kind of like fairies, or they're like weird like things, and like that these, or that they're like certain areas of like these, like, because I mean people did experience these things before, right? And they had this kind of weird notion of like, well, it seems to be related to this kind of like the other world, like sort of going back to the liminal space, crop circles like appearing in places that are more like Stonehenge area, like those type of things, or there's some other kind of phenomenon that happens in the area. Like there's a lot more like electromagnetic phenomenon or weird underground, like types of, things. Like it tends to be like, I think areas that have large like chalk, soil and deposits and stuff too. So there's like, I don't know, but I mean like they had like, I don't know that they were specifically thinking that these were like pranks or trying to cover it up. And they weren't really thinking that they were aliens. Like that's just, so like, I don't know, just kind of so that's like, I don't know, it kind of goes into this weird, like, I don't know, like just that, like, again, like going back to like some of our weird, like things like leprechauns and weird, like this kind of weird phenomenon of like, explaining this other thing with this, like it has something to do with this like other world, or like between world things, and like
so the leprechauns and and fairies, I can't remember which of them, but one of them is said to sometimes braid the hair of a horse's tail.
Which is interesting because some of the crop circles will have like a woven quality about them. They're not just like like a flattened path. They're kind of woven almost.
And that's kind of where I was going with it. That it's like, well, that's weird. But they're probably wearing like little flying saucers going around like horses' butts. They're only interested in human. Anyway. I mean, they're tails people. I mean, their tails were braided by flying saucers. Anyway, maybe a poor choice of.
And it's kind of a weird thing. It's like aliens are out there braiding horses' tails. It's like, why would you do that? Why is this like this is the bizarrest way to find ways of communicating?
Because maybe humans make really funny expressions when they're surprised or scared. But yeah. So you have that like braiding thing, right? Now I'm gonna jump into the science stuff for a second, only to jump back to where you were talking about, Bill, like Middle Ages and stuff, right? So one of the interesting things, some crop circles, particularly ones that don't have like that, if you hoax it with a board and string, you tend to damage one side of the plant. Things are bent and stuff. They don't continue to grow. You kind of kill them, and so you've got that going on. The ones that are just kind of laid down and continue growing and stuff, there's this thing that happens sometimes where you've got, Dan, you were describing like the curl of the kernel of the wheat plant. At a certain point, it bends because I think of like the starches and things in it, and then it kind of stiffens, it hardens. But these guys that get laid down, they straighten out again and they continue growing. And the thing that seems to do that is radiation. And one of the things that they discover on these, on some of these plants, is these what they call expulsion cavities that occur at the nodes of the plant, and it's like popcorn. It's like and which is an appropriate metaphor here because it's microwave radiation that would cause these things to happen. So you were talking earlier about guys walking around with microwave packs, okay? So, but here's an interesting thing. Those wheat kernels in that circle have higher protein, okay? They're more nutritious. So.
They also grow faster and taller.
Yeah. Are you saying leprechauns are out there microwaving the wheat to make it more nutritious?
I make no claims. I just ask questions and shrug my shoulders. But if you go back to this story in the 9th century, that there was this cleric or whatever that was concerned about people that were gathering seeds from what we would describe in this conversation as being like crop circles. And they were using them for some kind of like fertility stuff. Maybe fertility rites, or I don't know if they were using it like nutritionally or what, but they were believed to be using it for these fertility rites. So if they were real crop circles, that had these higher protein things, so it's like people had this sense that there was more oomph to these things for whatever reason, and they were gathering them from these particular places. Or they just figure these things showing up were of spiritual significance, so they'll gather their plants from there to use for stuff. But whatever the case, I just find that to be an interesting little link up of like, that they were being seen as being more magically potent, but actually they're also more nutritionally potent. And I just think that's kind of an interesting little parallel.
Another interesting point, and I didn't look at this too deeply, so I don't know if it's how widespread this is. But have you guys read about the ghost circles? And the ghost circle is when you have a crop circle and it goes back to normal over time, or you mow it down. I guess you mow it down at the end of the season or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the following season, year or two, it grows back in the same crop circle way. Yeah. But it doesn't happen all the time. So I don't know if that's tied into ones that are more, or ones that are less hoax-like, or if it's completely random. I don't know anything about that. I just thought it was interesting, that whole idea of the ghost circles.
Yeah, there's no reason for that to happen, other than some kind of weird residual radiation, or something else we don't understand.
Yeah. And you have to remember those medieval microwave backpacks, like those guys really, those pranksters back then really had those batteries must have been huge.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you had to drag along people with horses and things like that, turning things.
They're like pumping.
But it's the spin again. It's the spin that's behind it all. As long as you get them to go fast enough.
Yeah.
Tell them the Sabbath's coming. Was that still a rule for Christians in the Middle Ages? I know we moved it. Civilization.
Yeah, I don't think I particularly moved.
Did either of you see the video? And I don't know if this is legit or hoax or not. It is a picture of what looks like a tiny ball of light. And it's kind of like zigzagging through a field, and you see the crop circle form in like a matter of seconds.
Yeah, I wanted to find out if that was fake too. It's called the Oliver's Castle Circle, or the Oliver's Castle event, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if that was. I was looking into I expected that I was actually going to do a deep dive on some of these, because I didn't actually expect there to be very much out there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go out on the limb with that one and probably say that's probably not real, simply because people who are with the ball lightning things and that kind of stuff, it's, from my research, it's really hard to capture it. And there's been people who are study atmospheric weather conditions, and they have a really hard time finding and getting this footage. It's people that are almost like tornado chasers, but they're plasma storm chasers.
Right.
I think if it was real, those people would be all on top of it, because it'd be wow, you finally got this phenomenon on, I think it would have more of a splash in that community, rather, they come up more frequently, in that sense, because it's people are actively looking for documentation of that phenomenon, just from to study it from, so it's it's you have to really be in the right place at the right time, and it often doesn't last more than a few, I think typically the ball lightning thing might last up to a minute to two. It's a very short-lived phenomenon, and when it does go out, it explodes.
Here's my problem with any explanation regarding anything like weather related, whether it's wind or ball lightning or whatever. All these designs are so different, and if they were all generally the same or had similar characteristics, and they do to an extent, circles and lines, okay? But that's not enough, I don't think. I think if it was something more natural, it should follow very similar behaviors. And
Yeah,
you
it'd be a
don't see that
repeated,
at all.
like, yeah, repeated, like, pattern
Yeah.
that's, like, kind of, like, the same. And maybe there's a few out there that are that do kind of repeat that way, you know, but yeah, like, I don't know that
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there are like
so-
weird things that happen in this world for sure. I mean, there are like these like ice wheel things that generate on their own, and they're like it's like an Arctic weather phenomenon.
Or, like, what was is it the Tuskegee event? Is that the one I'm thinking where the meteor, like, hit, like, in the atmosphere in Russia and it knocked down, like, all the trees in the circle? It was like, but it was basically, like, from atmospheric phenomenon encountering, like, a meteorite and explodes, and the shock wave pressurizes it, and it does leave, like, a kind of pattern-ish kind of thing, but it's not, like, perfect like the like a crop circle, but, like, those types of weird things like that do happen. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like weird shit does occur in nature, you know, for sure.
Yeah, but you're not going to get that precision. And that's kind of what you're saying,
Yeah.
you know? It's
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would
And
have,
especially
like,
things that seem to have a message. If it's got like a picture of a face and a bunch of stuff in binary code, it's like, okay, like explain this to me. Explain this to me. You know, it's
Well, so let's talk on that for a second. So I have to, as much as I like that idea, and I like the concept, to be redundant, of you know, getting a return message however many years
Yeah.
later, we can't ignore the fact that the original message was made public. So people
Right.
did know about it. It wasn't like just the people in at the telescope, they sent this message, they were all hush hush, they didn't
Right.
give out any of the details. So we can't ignore that, unfortunately. So it is possible.
yeah, it could be done by probably well planned, highly skilled group.
Like
That
Dave
also-
and Don.
That Dave and Dunn with at least a couple pole vaulters. Yeah. No, but yeah, that yeah. So could people have intentionally done it? I mean, I suppose they could intentionally design something like that. Are the people that intentionally intentionally design something like that the same people that could then pull it off in a field? Maybe. But like, you start putting all these like unlikelihoods together in my mind, and it's like,
yeah, it's
I mean,
like,
I know
well,
people are like,
none-
oh, so
none
it's
of
much
them-
more likely it was a flying saucer, right? But
No, maybe
give me an
not.
explanation then, yo.
I mean, like, yeah, it's like, well,
Comments.
there's I think, like, all of the stuff have, like, things that could do something, like people could be pranksters, and some have an artist and making things. Some of this could be natural phenomenon, and some of it could be this, but it's none of them are seemingly all of that. You know, it's like the prankster ones don't seem to exhibit the burn microwave thing. You know, the ball lightning type things don't seem to have, like, the overly complicated things. Like there's, like, you know, it's, so it does have a kind of weird, just like, you know, it's the ones that, like, require a lot of speed and technical things in poor weather conditions, so or ones in highly observable areas that all the like happen, you know, overnight very fast. You know, it's like it's all these things, like, it's just like almost like none of these things, and aliens isn't really the best either thing. None of these things feel like they're any particularly fit the peg in any of these crop circles holes, crop circle shaped holes.
Yeah,
yeah, it's like none of these are none of them feel like they're satisfying, other, like, you know, in any real shape. You know, government cover up doesn't feel satisfying. Doesn't feel, none of this feels like very, like, good. Like, it's just like as a tidy solution. You know, just, yeah, it's.
I mean, to me, the thing that I know people are going to freak on this, but like the thing that makes the most sense is probably some type of spacecraft that's doing these things. And the thing that gets me the most is these apical nodes on the wheat that burst from the microwave radiation, or radiation that still electromagnetic radiation that still seems to be present in certain crop circles demonstrably.
So let's hang on that for a second because we can't ignore this. Do you know, is that, so if you take a crop circle, one that is seemingly not man-made, and it has that, that rupture, okay?
Right.
Do you know for sure, is it within all of those that are in the circle, in the design itself, do they all have the rupture or just some of them, or you're not sure?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Because so that would be very interesting because it's like I read about people explaining it like that can occur naturally. Okay, it can occur naturally, but if it happens in all of them in the design, I don't know about that being natural. You know, that seems a little.
I haven't heard an explanation of that happening naturally.
I just saw it can happen naturally. I didn't dive into.
Yeah, like if it was like, oh, that part of the field was struck by lightning at some point or something like that, right? Like that's just, that little section could have had.
And maybe that's the way they get around it. Like, oh yeah, it happens naturally all the time when lightning strikes. You know.
Yeah. In this particular, but yeah, if they're all ruptured like that, I'm sure someone's done this, but I wonder if within the ruptured areas, if there's like any kind of other, like almost like a sub pattern to that, because like kind of like anything, like when you're heating something, it doesn't always do that directly evenly, right? Like other points will often be hotter, than another point. It's just not the way things work. Even if this was caused by plasma, whether that's plasma from alien ships or plasma from phenomena, whatever it is, like it would still probably have an uneven, points. I wonder if there's like further, if it doesn't occur on all of them, I wonder if there's like some other kind of, pattern within the pattern, sort of like, a sub pattern. It'd be interesting to, that's something I didn't really think of till now, but I wonder if I'm sure someone's looked at that. Like there's gotta be something out there. Cause it's,
there's just, oh my God, there's so
I just
much.
feel like it's weird that like it was such like it's like, despite this happening for centuries, at least we know, right? Like these types of things occur. I feel like once we hit that like prank point, it was just like, that drop off, and it's like, we don't really talk about this anymore, because we still talk about like even other stuff that like falls into like the weird phenomenon, like, like the cryptids or UFOs or we still have that, but like this one was very like, yep, it's just all tidied up, wrapped up, done and done. It's like,
and I
remember, it's like way to be very non-curious about anything, you guys. Like it's just like, and then like when you get to that, like explanations, well they microwaved them or they did this thing, like the pranksters did all that stuff. It's like that starts to get like, but it's just even from like an, like an Occam's razor standpoint, it's like the tech that they'd have to be messing with and stuff like that is just out of the realm of commercial things, and the fact that like there's no evidence, we haven't seen like Doug didn't produce his microwave radiation gun, and say when we had the boards and we matted them down, Dave came by and fried them all, like and popped the popcorn. Like it's like they didn't say that, and that's never come up. And it's like, and again, if you're just doing this as like an art expression, like that's fun, like you're gonna mess around with that. Like it just, it feels like it's just not like, there's no satisfying, the, I guess like conclusion from it's just a prank, because that stuff is kind of like, and if it's like, oh, well, it's natural, and it's like, oh, so it's, again, like you said, Dan, like it's always lightning striking where you made the crop circles. That just happens to be the case.
And it's always at night. When, no one can see it.
It just feels like it's a weird thing. Yeah, something weird about that whole thing. It's just like and we've kind of just been like, it's fine. Pranks done and done. Like I don't know.
But kind of like what you were saying earlier, it's. I remember it was in the 90s when, obviously it was in the 90s because we talked about that before, where this was like a hot item, like for such a short period of time, it was like everywhere. And then these guys come out with the boards and like it got shut down. Yeah. And I feel like you never heard about it again. I mean, obviously you did, but not at that same level.
Right. And it's not going to make the news and stuff like that, because then it's like, oh, well, we're just being pranked. Or maybe it'll make the local news, like crop circles appeared in, Joe's field, like, overnight. And that was weird. It's probably pranksters again with their boards.
They got it again.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's it's like, yeah, it's I kind of feel like
Yeah, it's a. I don't know. It seems to me like something's going on, and the official powers don't want us to know about it for some reason or another.
yeah, oh, that could just be like it's a weird thing. This is like it's just weird. Like it's like I don't know. There's a sometimes we do like and I'm sure I'm personally guilty of this. So like sometimes when the weird things happen, you just want to be like, nah, something. It's fine. Nothing's going on.
Yeah.
It's like it's all easily explainable. Put that out of my mind. Like that's just, I don't have to worry
It's,
about
like,
weird
it's-
shit happening.
yeah,
Just like
sometimes it's-
randomly,
It's just kind of the Jaws thing. It's like,
Yeah.
we'll just pretend the shark's gone.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. Everything will probably be fine. Don't worry. Go enjoy the beach. Don't
Yeah,
worry
yeah.
about it.
Beaches are open.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, and again, like, okay, so I'll say this last thing about the government cover-up thing. You guys hear about Operation Blackbird and Colin Andrews?
No.
This is a good one. Okay, so it was this thing. It was in the UK. If I'm wrong about any of this, comments, people, comments. It's in the UK. A guy named Colin Andrews, who's like a good journalist, television journalist or something. He was basically like there's this cooperative thing with essentially like British military or defense, well, whatever terminology is lacking here, people. But their defense world, and they had this field it's called Operation Blackbird. If anyone wants to look this up more, Colin Andrews, and they had this field that they were like, okay, what we're going to study this. We're going to see if we can catch crop circles happen, and whatever. So they have a field that's being monitored by the military overnight and whatever, and they're doing this and so they're a little ways into it, and then overnight, one of these people comes to Colin Andrews, and they're like, it happened. There's a crop circle, like blah blah blah, and like according to the agreement, he's cooperating with the military, so he puts this statement out there, and so in the light, he hadn't even seen it yet. And the light comes up, and he gets to the middle of the crop circle, and somebody had put this astrology game, this like astrology. So it was like it's a hoax. It was a clever hoax. So like he was pissed, as you would be. But wait, the military was watching it all night, and some hoaxers came in and did stuff. That's a little too convenient to like, oh look, on this big television thing, it's displaying how fake all of this is, and it's like, oh, yeah. Again, this convenient kind of, well, the military would have had to have been in on it in order for that to happen. They'd have to all turn their backs for 5 hours.
They're the pranksters. That's why.
Yeah, or they send out the special forces that are good at making these things.
Yeah, Special Crop Circle Division, RAF.
Got a little crop circle patch on their.
Yeah.
But yeah, so. Now, at the same time that this was going on, at the same time that this was going on, there was an actual investigation going on at a place called Silbury Hill. That was on these orbs and crop circles and things. So some people say the Blackbird thing was sort of like a big distraction tactic because there was this other thing that was going on locally as well. That was like a big investigation they didn't want people involved in. But again, why the effort to discredit? Well, because there's some benefit to discrediting folks that are coming forward with these weird stories. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as a thing. Some of these crop circles have such strange stuff associated with them. Like, did you hear about the machines that are implied by some of these? There's a guy...
Like the machine parts?
Yeah. And again, it's like this idea of like, oh, you take this thing, this 2D thing, and you spin it so it's a 3-dimensional thing, and then it suggests these machines you can build and stuff like that. And it's like, this is so weird. But like, here's one of the problems with this, and this is something I think we can all appreciate, talking about like this era of things being hard to prove. I can't prove that apical nodes in crop circles have been exposed to radiation. I can't. I don't have that expertise. I have to rely on somebody else to tell me that. I can't take asymmetrical crop circles, pop them into a computer, spin them around to make them a three-dimensional thing, and then build machines from those things. I can't do that. I don't have that. I don't have those skills. I have skills to just talk about these things and then just go off on tangents. Those are my skills. I'm also a very good hypnotist. White rabbit hypnosis. You're still here. We'd probably get along. So a lot of these things, you have to go off of these other people's arguments. And then you're like at a party and you're talking about these things and you're like, yeah, these things. And someone's like, I never heard of that. I have an undergrad in botany. I never heard of that. No, they don't curl. And it's like, well, no, they do. I heard about it. I've read a thing on it. You have to come with all this stuff that you have to bring from other experts. And then, so it's hard to like.
Well, actually, like, here's the,
bring all this.
if you want to have the basis for levels of why people will cover things up or do things, it's like, simply because like there seems to be a modern phenomenon, and this is not a conspiracy because like it happens all the time, is that we are trying to constantly undermine people who have expertise in fields and undermine the idea of people having expertise. It seems to be like that seems to be a like non-conspiracy, like, you know, it's like no, don't trust this person who like knows what they're talking about. Trust me, the Dunning-Kruger effect manifest is physical form.
Yeah,
you know, it's like so it's like there's a, you know, it's like in whatever field, it's like, so there's this kind of like, so maybe there you go, that's an explanation, is like it's a good way to like undermine expertise. Like the people say, oh, this is a thing that's happening. It's like no, it's just pranksters. You don't know what you're talking about. And see, because you don't know what you're talking about, all experts like you don't know what they're talking about. You know, it does.
So I've got the ultimately satisfying explanation for this that I have not heard anyone present yet.
Oh, you've only heard it here. We
Only
give you
here.
the answer.
This is a Wandering Monsters podcast exclusive. You haven't heard this anywhere else. And if you have, put it in the comments, because I haven't. And that's proof of telepathy. And that I do actually have a skill. Okay, so the crop circles already were there. Right? Oh, yeah. Well, where's he going with this, right? I'll tell you. You sit tight. I'm going. They already were there. This is it's a simulation, right? This is a simulation, and we are operating on something like a virtual circuit board, okay? That's running this simulation. And what happens is, at parts of this virtual circuit board, sometimes something glitches out, particularly where there's like a lot of electrical stuff going on, where they're like chalk deposits, because that's like a capacitor on this virtual circuit board. And what happens is it glitches out, and what's left are these like braided these braided crop circles, which are actually just highly complicated structures for running the simulation. That behind all of it is fairies and Bigfoot.
They're underneath they're treated to the underground.
They're literally underneath it all. Yeah, they're underneath it both literally and metaphorically.
Well, there's I know we have to probably wrap into our things soon, so I won't get too much into this, because also this could go down a very large rabbit hole. But there's a whole like, you guys ever hear of like Gaia theory? Like, so Gaia theory, like it's largely been like abandoned or morphed into other stuff, but just as like, you know, it's like, so that the Earth is this kind of like, it's an organism, you know, it's and things like this, like crop circle phenomenon and stuff like that, it's almost like a manifestation of like injury or stuff to it's like how it manifests, like it's, you know, like something occurring to it, you know, it's just like why it has organizational properties is because like, and it's not like Earth is an organism like it's, you know, it has conscious or something in that sense, but it's like
Although some
at least
Gaia
according
theories
to
think
Gaia
that.
theory, like whether like that's
Yeah.
my personal or anything like that, but like the like 'cause I don't want to go too like animist in that sense because that's not really in it, but that idea is that these phenomena occur because like this is an organism operating in
Yeah.
and these different weird things are manifestations of like something occurring to that organism. It's like so there. Like, that's like that gets like a little definitely gets a little hippie trippy in there, but it's like
it might explain the ones that are like, okay, circles and weird things like that, but it doesn't explain the ones that seem to have messages.
right, yeah. But it's like unless the Earth is unless you do go down
Unless the Earth
route.
is straight up intelligent, which
But it's just like
I
I just like wanted to throw that out as
that.
another weird, not fully satisfying explanation of something that could be there. Should we figure out how we gonna wrap this? How we gonna like do crop circles? It's just yeah.
Well, how about this? How about the implications of crop circles? If they have a non-fraud origin, do you think the implications? What do you think the implications are? And do you think those implications are scary? I will start with. I think the implications are that they were done by something that isn't human. Or that is like some kind of like future human or something like that. But it's not much better. So non-human. I don't think that's necessarily scary because I guess I don't think that the world, that reality has the borders that we think it does. I expect that some levels of weirdness can happen. But I need to give it some kind of a monster.
Well, here we go. Maybe this will help. Like, let's just say, okay, you live out on a farm or you just like you have a really big backyard, right? Like things like that, like whatever, or you live in an area, and you go to bed at night, and then you wake up the next morning, and there's this huge, crazy crop circle like out in the
here
field.
We go again.
It's like
yeah,
and it is one of these burnt like weird things like it matches that part of the phenomenon, the non prankster. You didn't hear a bunch of generators going in through the night or like it's like what is that? How weird is that? Like, are you weirded out by that?
So
like,
a little bit, but actually I think I'd go a little more. My reaction would be a little more Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like not quite building mountains out of mashed potatoes, but like, like it would be like, wait a minute, like this happened in my space. Like, I'd probably feel like I was special, or even more special than I think I already am. And so I don't think I'd be scared by it because I think if they wanted to do me harm, I was right there. Like they were smart enough, they could have just gotten me, I think I would be in awe and excitement about it. And if I happened to have a job at the time, I would soon not have it because I'd just be gathering seeds from the field and using them for things that, this would be my job. I'd probably try and make some money off of it because it'd just be more interesting than whatever I was doing before.
It's like magic beans from the beanstalk.
Yeah, right.
They sell those.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to shut up. Phenomenon in and of itself. What do you think?
What's your rating? What's your rating?
I'm going to give it 2 monsters, but they're like happy dancing monsters that came to lead the crop circle. So not scary monsters at all. You could debate, maybe you could say that I didn't even give a monster.
It's like weird because like when I'm thinking of that way, like my original thought was to give it 2, right? Because I was gonna be like, crop circles they're just weird. It's like this weird thing that happens. But like if it happened like to me, like that kind of thing, and it just like plopped down in my backyard kind of thing, I think I'd be a little more freaked out. But in that same thing of like the freaked out part, especially like given it's the more phenomenon version of it, right? I would be like kind of like I don't know. I think I might have to bump it up to like a kind of like closer to a 3. Maybe I'll go 2.5 because it's like because it would. It's just that there's weird like I feel like it's like kind of like reality breaking kind of phenomenons, right? Like, especially if it happens to you in your thing, like all of a sudden, boom, no crop circle, boom, your whole field is this crazy thing. And depending how intricate and the more intricate and weird it is, the more my freak out level would go higher up. You know, it's like if it's just a plain circle with nothing else going on, like I might be like, just, you know, did I let the dog out? He ran around a bunch. You know, it's like I mean, pulled the microwave off the wall but it was plugged into an extension cord.
Blasted out all my apical nodes.
Yeah. But I would be kind of like, I think I would be a little bit freaked out. So I'm gonna go. I'll bump it up to a 3 because it's just that kind of weird bumping into something weird. Kind of sometimes just kind of is kind of not scary like I think it's gonna kill me or do something like that, but scary in the
like an unsettling kind of way.
Yeah, in an unsettling phenomenon, weirdness about the world kind of way. like everything, like it is.
Yeah, like the implications are more like the thing than the fact that your stuff's weird.
Yeah, like kind of like you were saying, like if it's like not be like the simulation, but there's like but it kind of like those instances where like the curtain gets pulled back in the theater a little bit, you know, and it's like, well, no, now there's something weird going on. Like it doesn't, you know. Yeah. So that's where I will say that. And also too, like if there's those Black Ops team of crop circle artists, like how do I join? Then I might lower this.
Yeah, right. Like it's like the organized left I keep hearing is so well funded. It's like, can I apply?
Yeah.
So I gave 2 happy monsters. You gave 3 unsettling or weird monsters.
Yeah, all right.
Only one of us left.
Come on.
So let me preface by saying, at one point in time, I don't know if it still exists. I need to. I'll put it down in the description. I'll put a link. But there was a website for people. It was like some kind of crop circle makers website. And allegedly, if you looked in the source code, there are references to, what was it, M5 and
MI5,
CIA.
Yeah. I think they're called circle makers. I think that's the name of their group. Yeah.
So I'll see if I can find the link. I'll put it in the description. And if it doesn't exist anymore, I'll see if I can find an archives.org link to it. That'd be pretty cool. All right. So, so when you were talking about this, Bill, it made me think of this story. When I was in college, when I was taking physics, one of the things we talked about was smoke detectors and how smoke detectors worked. And inside smoke detectors, there is some kind of radioactive element that is the basis for how they work, from what I remember. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming home for a break and one of the smoke detectors stopped working. And I was like, oh, cool, let's take this apart. Let's see how this works. Completely forgetting about how it actually works. And I started to take it apart. And I get maybe like 30 seconds into it, you know, a couple screws out, cover off, whatever. And I remember about the radioactive substance in it. And I'm like, oh, shoot, probably shouldn't mess with this. And I, stopped, put it back together, and that was the end of that. And I think this works as a good segue for me and how I feel about this. If this happened to me on my property, initially would be like, oh, cool, I'm going to go check this out. And then I'll go wander in the field and then remember about the radiation. Be like, oh, shoot, maybe I shouldn't be back here. So I don't really think it's scary per se, regardless of how it's formed. I'll probably give it like a 1.5. I don't really think there's much to it. Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, I'll say that.
Is the half monster the bottom half or the top half?
Well, it's the bottom half because it's making crop circles.
Yeah, it's wandering around. It's a crop circle.
Someone needs to braid his tail. All right. Well, I don't know. I feel like in some ways this was more conclusively inconclusive than some of the other ones. But I'm still leaning towards there's like surprisingly more I want to look into to find out more about some of these specific ones, like the Arecibo answer. A year later, there's a binary code with another face and a message that was translatable in English. Here, this is a great way to wrap this up. Do I have that? Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. This sounds very relevant. Much pain, but still time. Believe. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing.